The lioness approached the campsite with the majestic determination of a sovereign returning to her domain. Her movements were measured and confident as three tiny golden figures followed behind her. Cubs barely a few months old observed this strange place where their mother appeared completely at ease. Joy Adamson remained motionless upon hearing the low, familiar roar echoing across the Kenyan savannah. After months of absence, Elsa had returned, and she had not come alone. "George, come see. She's brought the cubs." Joy's voice resonated through the improvised camp in Meru National Park. George Adamson emerged from his tent with rifle in hand as a precaution, but a smile already formed on his sun-weathered face. It was October 1959, 3 months after they had released Elsa into the wild. There she stood, no longer the clumsy cub they had raised, but a magnificent wild lioness, a mother who had decided to introduce her offspring to the only humans she considered family. "Jesper, Gopa, little Elsa," Joy whispered, instinctively naming the 3 cubs as Elsa gently nudged them toward the couple who had raised her. "Our grandchildren." The moment was extraordinary, yet impossible simultaneously. A completely wild lioness, who had learned to hunt, survive, and mate in nature, voluntarily returned to the humans, who had raised her to present her family. This represented the culmination of an unprecedented experiment that began 3 years earlier, when a defensive gunshot forever changed the lives of 3 people and 3 lion cubs. In February 1956, morning sunlight cast long shadows through the thorny vegetation of Meru National Park as George Adamson, a 52-year-old senior game warden, departed for another routine patrol. Reports had reached him about a problematic lion in the area, possibly a man-eater requiring investigation. He had no knowledge that this patrol would forever alter his life. George walked cautiously through the savannah with rifle ready and all senses alert. 3 decades protecting African wildlife had taught him to read nature's language. The sudden silence of birds, tension in the air before danger arrived. The attack occurred without warning. An adult lioness burst from dense vegetation, charging directly toward him with the fury of 150 kilograms of muscle and maternal instinct. There was no time for questions, only reaction. George's rifle fired once. The animal fell within meters, killed instantly. George cautiously approached the lioness's body, feeling his heart constrict upon realizing what had actually occurred. There had been no random aggression in the attack. It was maternal desperation. Near the female's body, 3 tiny golden figures moved restlessly among the rocks. Cubs, babies perhaps 4 or 5 days old with eyes still closed, completely dependent on the mother he had just shot. "Dear God," George whispered, feeling the weight of the situation's reality. She was protecting her cubs. For a moment George considered his options. Leaving the cubs meant condemning them to certain death. They were too small to survive alone. Taking them meant assuming responsibility for which he was unprepared. But in reality, the decision had been made the moment he pulled the trigger. Carefully, George collected the 3 cubs, 2 males and 1 notably smaller female, and began the long walk back to camp, where his wife Joy waited with tea, unaware their lives were about to change completely. Joy Adamson was painting watercolors of local tribes when she heard George's Land Rover approaching. This formed part of a project documenting Kenya's native cultures, work that completely absorbed her and had established her reputation as a naturalist artist. But when George emerged from the vehicle carrying a wooden box producing sounds of protest, all of Joy's attention focused on the 3 tiny occupants. "Oh, George, what have you done?" she asked, but her tone conveyed not reproach, but immediate maternal fascination. "I had to kill their mother. She came directly at me," George explained, extending the box. "I couldn't let them die." The cubs were tiny, vulnerable creatures with soft golden fur and eyes still closed. The smallest of the 3, the female, fit easily in Joy's palm as she held her with reverence, as if cradling life itself. "This little one needs special care," Joy observed, noting the female was visibly smaller and more fragile than her brothers. "What shall we call them?" "Big One and Lustica for the males," George decided, observing that the 2 larger cubs already showed distinct personalities. "And this little one, how about we call her Elsa?" The name emerged naturally, without ceremony. Elsa, who would become the world's most famous animal. In the following days, Joy and George immersed themselves in the complex task of raising orphaned lion cubs. No instruction manual existed for such an undertaking. They experimented with different milk formulas, feeding schedules, and heating methods. Big One and Lustica adapted relatively well, but Elsa struggled to survive. "She's so small," Joy worried, feeding Elsa with a bottle every 2 hours. "She might not make it." "Yes, she will," George insisted, observing the tiny lioness's fierce determination. "Look at the strength in this little one. She has spirit," and Elsa truly possessed it. Gradually, she not only survived, but began to thrive, developing a personality that combined feline curiosity with almost human affection toward the Adamsons. 6 months later, practical reality imposed itself. The 3 cubs, now quite large and increasingly strong, had become too big to be safely maintained at camp. Big One and Lustica particularly showed increasingly wild and unpredictable tendencies. "We must make a decision about them," George said during dinner, watching the 3 young lions play in the yard like enormous domestic cats. "We cannot keep them much longer." Joy knew he was right, but the prospect of separation was painful. For months, the cubs had become part of the family. She loved them as if they were her own children. The solution came through contacts in the European zoo world. Rotterdam Zoo in the Netherlands offered to receive Big One and Lustica, providing professional care and opportunities to participate in captive breeding programs. "And Elsa?" Joy asked as arrangements were finalized. George and Joy looked at each other. The smallest of the 3 had become special to both. Elsa was different, more docile, more affectionate, more integrated into domestic life. The idea of sending her to a zoo seemed wrong. "Perhaps we could keep her," George suggested cautiously, "at least for a while longer." "And afterward," Joy insisted. "She cannot live in captivity forever. That wouldn't be fair." It was then that the revolutionary idea was born, one that would define the rest of their lives. If Elsa could not live in captivity and could not continue being an indoor pet indefinitely, perhaps she could be taught to live in the wild. "Do you think it's possible?" Joy asked, her excitement growing. "Do you really think we can teach her to be wild?" "I don't know," George admitted, "but it's worth trying." What followed were 2 extraordinary years of experimentation, education, and mutual discovery. Joy and George became the first humans to systematically prepare a captive-raised large feline for life in freedom. The process was gradual and filled with challenges. Elsa needed to learn skills her mother would normally teach her: how to hunt, how to interpret nature's signals, how to defend herself from predators and rivals. George assumed the role of hunting instructor, taking Elsa on long walks through the savannah where she could observe and practice natural feline behaviors. Initially, Elsa showed more interest in playing with dik-diks, small antelopes, than in hunting them, but gradually her instincts began to awaken. Joy became the social mother, teaching Elsa about hierarchies and relationships. During this stage, Elsa developed deep bonds with both Adamsons, especially with Joy, whom she clearly considered her primary maternal figure. "Today, Elsa killed her first impala," Joy wrote in September 1958. "She didn't eat much, still learning to appreciate raw meat, but her hunting instinct is clearly awakening. George believes she'll be ready for reintroduction attempts in spring." But technically, preparing Elsa was only part of the challenge. The emotional aspect of separation would be much more complex. By December 1958, Elsa, now almost 3 years old and weighing over 120 kilograms, was a magnificent lioness in full physical maturity, but emotionally remained deeply dependent on the Adamsons. She slept near their tent, followed Joy wherever she went, and showed visible anxiety when separated from her parents. "How will we explain that she must leave us?" Joy asked one night, watching Elsa sleep peacefully near the campfire. "She doesn't understand she's not human." "Perhaps we don't need to explain anything," George responded thoughtfully. "Perhaps we just need to give her the right opportunity." The right opportunity came in the form of a remote area of the park, far from tourist trails and human activity, where Elsa could gradually adapt to wildlife without completely losing contact with the Adamsons. The plan involved establishing a temporary camp in the chosen area, allowing Elsa to explore and familiarize herself with the territory, and gradually reducing her dependence on human-provided food and shelter. In January 1959, they made the move. The new camp was near the Jura River in an area rich in wildlife, where Elsa would have ample hunting opportunities and hopefully encounter other lions. The first months were difficult. Elsa was clearly confused by the change in environment and routine. She clung more than ever to the Adamsons, as if fearing they would abandon her as her biological mother had been forced to do. But gradually her instincts began speaking louder. She spent increasingly more time exploring alone, Her hunting skills improved and, crucially, she began showing interest in other lions in the area. "I found tracks this morning," George reported in May. "Definitely lion tracks," and Elsa sniffed them with great interest. "I think the time has come." July 1959. The day of release arrived with a mixture of anticipation and heartbreak. Elsa, now completely capable of hunting and surviving on her own, seemed to understand something important was happening. Joy packed the last items from the temporary camp with tears in her eyes. 3.5 years of daily contact had created bonds transcending species. Elsa was not just a pet, she was a daughter. "She'll be fine," George assured, though his own voice broke. "We've taught her well. She's ready." The final farewell was simple and devastating. Elsa followed the Land Rover for several hundred meters, as she used to do during camp moves. But this time, when the vehicle did not stop and departed forever, she remained standing on the road, watching as her human parents left. Joy turned in the passenger seat for one last look. Elsa remained motionless, majestic against the African sunset, a silhouette representing both success and loss. "Born free," Joy whispered, not knowing she had just pronounced the title of the book that would immortalize this story. Born free, and now free again. The following months were filled with constant anxiety for the Adamsons. They returned to George's routine as game warden, but their thoughts remained with Elsa. Was she well? Had she integrated with other lions? Had she found sufficient food? Answers began arriving in September, when local guides reported sightings of an unusually tame lioness in the area where Elsa had been released. Then, in October, came definitive confirmation. Lioness tracks with cubs near the old campsite. "We must go see," Joy decided, "if it really is Elsa and she has cubs." The return journey to Elsa's territory was filled with anticipation. Would she recognize them, allow them to approach, or see them as a threat to her cubs? The answer came in the form of a familiar roar resonating across the savannah, and there she was, Elsa, magnificent and wild, emerging from vegetation with 3 tiny cubs following cautiously. The reunion was magical. Elsa approached Joy and George with the confidence of one who never doubted they would return. She rubbed against them, purred, showed clear affection, and then, in the most extraordinary gesture of all, called the cubs to approach. "She's introducing them to us," Joy whispered incredulously. "She's saying we're family." During the following hours, Elsa behaved like any proud mother introducing her children to grandparents. The cubs, initially shy, gradually accepted the humans' presence under their mother's calm guidance. Jesper, Gopa, little Elsa, Joy named them, continuing the family tradition of giving human names to lions. What followed were some of the happiest months in the Adamsons' lives. Elsa established a pattern of regular visits, bringing the cubs to meet their human grandparents. Sometimes she stayed for days, allowing Joy and George to observe the young lion's development. These visits demonstrated that the experiment had been more successful than their most optimistic expectations predicted. Elsa had not only survived in the wild, but had prospered, reproduced, and maintained emotional bonds with the humans who raised her. "She proved it's possible," Joy wrote in her diary in December 1959. "A captive raised animal can return to nature and live completely wild without losing the capacity to love and be loyal." The year 1960 dawned with changes in the air. Kenya was advancing toward independence, bringing new pressures on national park management. Resentment grew among some local employees about the special treatment Elsa and her family received. "They're wild animals," argued a wildlife department official during a tense meeting. "They shouldn't have regular contact with humans. That goes against all wildlife management policies." George firmly defended his position. "Elsa is not an ordinary wild animal. She was raised by humans and maintains family bonds with us. Forcing total separation would be cruel and unnecessary." But political pressures intensified. Amid these tensions, tragedy struck. January 1961. Elsa fell ill. Symptoms began subtly: loss of appetite, lethargy, lack of desire to play with cubs, but rapidly evolved into something more serious. Joy and George found Elsa visibly weakened during one of their regular visits. She still recognized them, still showed affection, but was clearly sick. "We must bring a veterinarian," Joy insisted. "She needs medical treatment." "Park personnel will never allow it," George responded grimly. "They already question our involvement with her. Medical intervention would be considered unacceptable interference with a wild animal. But she's not just a wild animal. She's our daughter, On January 24, 1961, Joy saw Elsa for the last time. The lioness lay in an acacia's shade, clearly dying but still conscious. The three cubs remained nearby, confused and distressed by their mother's condition. Joy sat beside Elsa, holding her enormous head in her lap as she had when Elsa was a cub. "You were free, my girl," she whispered, with tears streaming down her face. "You lived as you should live. You had cubs, found love, found freedom. We couldn't have asked for more." Elsa died peacefully in the early morning hours, with Joy holding her paw. Subsequent autopsy revealed she died of babesiosis, a tick-borne disease similar to malaria that often affects large felines in Africa. Elsa's funeral was simple but deeply emotional. She was buried near the river where she learned to hunt, under a tree she used for shade during hot afternoons. A simple stone marked her grave. Elsa, born free. She was only 5 years old, George said during the simple ceremony, but she lived more fully than many animals, spending decades in captivity. She knew freedom, motherhood, love. It was a complete life.